Welcome to Impact Pasadena. It's my great honor and delight to have City Council Member Steve Madison here with us. We've been talking in the previous segment about some of the vision for Pasadena going forward. We talked a little bit about the finances and some of the housing and transportation issues. But one thing I'd love to touch on in this segment is education. I know that the Pasadena Unified School District has a long and somewhat difficult history over the past decades. And I know that it's also come to something of a head now in terms of the finances for the district. Rather than get too much into the financial problems, which I think we can talk about, I would like to get a sense from you about what some of the goals you think are for the district and how we can overcome some of the challenges that it's faced. What are your thoughts?
Very important issue, and my constituents ask me about this all the time. And not just the ones who have school-age kids. I think all of us have a strong interest. And I would just say, kind of as an overlay to this, education is what makes our country as great as it is. Even today, you go around the world, and if you don't have economic status, if you're not a very wealthy person, or you don't have some social standing that's familial, you don't have as many choices as those people. Not so in our country. In our country, anybody who gets an education and works hard can rise to the White House or have her own talk show and be a media mogul and what have you. And it's just one of the great things about our country. So we all need to pay close attention to it. I think what I tell my constituents is, the school district is a separate body from the city and the city council. And so administration and curriculum and finances are all handled by the school board and the district staff. And what we really have in Pasadena is we have two school systems. We have the PUSD and we have as fine a private school, independent school network as is anywhere in the country. There may be equals, but I don't think any of them surpass what we have right here in Pasadena. Right. And so one sort of regrettable byproduct of that is a lot of the most affluent, engaged families who are so important to have in a school community opt for those private independent schools, and the public schools are left without the benefit of all those families. So for me, one thing that's been very important is keep my part of Pasadena, where I live and represent West Pasadena, keep the West Pasadena part of this equation. At one point, Linda Vista School is closed. At one point, there were, I think, 4 or 5 elementary schools in West Pasadena, just elementary schools. And now we have 2, and Linda Vista is closed. And San Rafael, thankfully, the district reversed itself and agreed to keep that one open. Okay. If they had closed that, we would have been completely cut off in terms of having an active campus, and I think that would have been a real mistake. So the dilemma for us at the city is, how do we help the district in every way we can, and yet I'm not comfortable simply writing a check to the district because vis-a-vis my constituents and the taxpayers, I don't have the accountability for how those funds are spent, and I know reasonable minds can differ about that. In Santa Monica, a hefty check is written every year from the city to the school district, and in connection with the sales tax proposal here, part of that, there will be 2 questions on the ballot in November. One is, should we or should we not have an additional 3/4 of a penny sales tax? The other is, should some of that money be allowed to go to the school district? So I'll be interested to see what people think about that.
Well, it's a tough question to talk about, but I know that the history of the PUSD kind of goes back to the busing issues, and essentially what I would describe as white flight from public schools during that era. And I think the larger issue it presents, which I think does impact city council, is the kind of the tale of two cities, where you have affluent segments of the city going to independent private schools, and that's been I think the mayor quoted something like 40%. I don't know. It's a substantial. And then the less affluent minority group going to the public schools. And this sort of sets up a vicious cycle because the white folks don't want to go send their kids to the school where it's largely minority for various reasons. So, for the city, how do we confront that challenge, and particularly ground zero the public schools?
Well, first, just let me say, It would be really regrettable if anyone that is not a person of color felt that they shouldn't have their children in the public schools because of racial diversity. That's what makes our country great. What this president is doing right now in terms of children and families is despicable, and we should always take the high road and recognize that our country is great because of its diversity, and all of us came here at some point, and so in terms of how we address that, I think the solution is to make the public schools as great as they can be. And you see that even in San Rafael, in my district, we've got a lot of local families that have their children in San Rafael, and it's a great school. They've got the Spanish language immersion program. They've got a great principal that we're very close friends with. And so I think that's how you do that, is sort of school by school. Now, unfortunately, the district's had another round of sort of financial issues. There was a county audit that found them to be lacking in certain respects, and also the timing couldn't be worse in terms of the sales tax proposal. Should we provide that district with more money? But I understand they're righting that ship and committed to making things right.
Yeah, hopefully the narrative will change, because I think the narrative has a lot of what we're doing, and it's kind of an old narrative.
It really is.
And I think there's more diversity coming into the public schools than people understand or realize. They're thinking about many years ago.
You bet.
So I think that's, and I think that's probably true for Pasadena in general. I think there may be an old narrative that's at work.
Yeah, I mean, I tell my friends who aren't from Pasadena, they have this image of a city with the lady with blue hair driving her car down Colorado Boulevard, and certainly that is there.
Yeah.
But we're a very diverse city, and we really are a mirror of what many larger cities have in terms of the makeup of the community, some of the problems that we have in our community and all.
Yeah.
But I think we're small enough to also have a social contract with one another. And I'd like to think that makes us better able to solve some of these problems.
I'm very hopeful, and I'm hopeful for the younger people too, because I think they do have a different attitude. And sometimes people who've lived in the city for 30 years see changes and they resist to a certain extent.
Right.
But people who are new to the city and appreciate all the things that we have, the great institutions, they can really help move us forward.
I think two things we should talk about in connection with that. One is the connection between education and housing, because the sad truth is another part of the district's problem financially is dwindling enrollment.
Yes.
And of course, if you're a school, enrollment is the key to your funding. You're basically funded per pupil, and then that forces them to consider closing campuses and the like. And the other is just safety, public safety. And certainly, our police department took on the role of policing the schools, and we still have that role, even though the budget is not there at the district to the same extent. But I think we're also a tale of two cities, sadly, in terms of how perhaps we view our police department and what kind of oversight should be brought to bear there. And as a former prosecutor, member of the Public Safety Committee, that's something I think and talk a lot about in terms of
let's talk some more about it, because I think that there has been controversy about some police incidents, and we've heard about it from all sides. There's been discussion about the kind of police oversight that we should have. So where do you come down on these?
Well, my view to date has been and is that we have robust oversight of our police department through the City Council. So we have a 4-member Public Safety Committee of the City Council. We have the full City Council obviously hears regular reports and considers the police department and everything from its budget to use of force incidents and the like. So in terms of that oversight question, I think accountability is key, and one thing I am is accountable to my constituents, whereas if you had a police commission of some sort, it would probably be just as political as a city council, but you wouldn't have the accountability to the voters. And if you have sort of the apparatus of an independent auditor or the like, I just don't think we're large enough to have to divert that much of a budget to that. We should be able to do it.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point that you raised. And I'd like to emphasize something that I've seen in my experience, which is elected officials like you, especially city councils, they really hear from their constituents. And this is a real dialogue that goes on much more than at any other level, I think, in our government. As somebody who's also been an elected official, I know how valuable that voter input is.
You bet.
You'd be amazed at how, you as a lawyer probably know that the jury always has some real common sense operating, and voters do too.
They do, and I will be playing horse in my driveway with my sons, and people will pull into the driveway to talk to me about an issue or what have you.
It's hard to go grocery shopping.
It is, and but that's a good thing, as you say.
Yeah. Let me raise another issue. I know I'm on the board of trustees at Pasadena City College, and we have an estimated, we don't really know the numbers, but we have an estimated 900 undocumented students, DACA students. And I remember when I was first running and talking to some of the students, and they were bright, and they were transferring to UCLA, and they were doing great stuff. And I said to the young man, boy, you have a great future. And he said, well, not really. He said, because I don't have documents, and the progress kind of stops here. So the Trump administration has made it very difficult and very fearful in terms of the ICE raids, but also stalling DACA. What can we do? I know we've talked about this as a city. What can we do? So,
for starters, our police department will not enforce immigration law and will not be party to these policies that the Trump administration is imposing. And I think they're odious. They are divisive. They're distracting from issues. I think it's sort of an emotional issue.
Yeah.
The factual narrative's just wrong, too. Immigrants, documented or undocumented, are less likely to commit crimes.
Right.
They're more hardworking. Frankly, the reason they're swimming or crawling through tunnels to get here is they will do jobs that many Americans refuse to do.
Yeah, interesting statistic that I saw is that 30% of new businesses are started by immigrants. So
there you go. Yeah. So. And then in terms of our relationship with the federal government, we have a legislative policy committee on the council, and we try to weigh in on issues as we can. I'm not sure that the White House is listening to Pasadena ever, but we continue to try.
So as a lawyer, and I know it's not your field of expertise, but just in terms of the what you mentioned about police enforcement and cooperation, are we on solid legal footing here?
Absolutely.
In your view? Okay.
Yes. Those are federal laws, and we clearly have the discretion to allocate our resources enforcement-wise to state law. So.
Okay. And I know that we didn't go the full-on sanctuary city route. Can you explain a little bit the thinking behind that and the distinctions here?
Yeah, I think it was a concern on the part of my colleagues that we not jeopardize funding streams and the like, and I think the sense was we can accomplish the same end by maybe a less noisy statement or policy.
Right.
So, you look at our last president, and it's really sad that President Trump has undone some of these policy initiatives, DACA, Cuba, lifting the embargo, and that was a very positive thing. And, President Obama lived in Pasadena his sophomore year at Oxy, and I had a lot of fun last year actually dedicating a plaque in front of the apartment where he lived on Glenarm, just east of Royal Parkway, actually.
And you can see the plaque there today if you'd like to
walk
visit.
Down the sidewalk, and we're still hoping to get him to come by and take some photos at some point.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me talk about the Trump administration a little bit and how it impacts us. I know there's great concern, and I sometimes try to counsel people to say, it could be worse and all that, but it's pretty bad. Today we just had the news that the Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy, who has been a swing vote on the court, is retiring, and so the Trump administration will be naming a new nominee, and is hoping to do this before they get a confirmation before the midterms. I mean, as a lawyer, as an elected official, as a progressive, what's your thoughts about how to...
Terrible news.
Yeah,
it really is terrible news, because it likely gives Trump an opportunity to appoint, and I'm concerned about the kind of justice that he will appoint. Now, I will say that court has a way of making its members more moderate, and Justice Kennedy, for example, when he was on the Ninth Circuit, was viewed as a very conservative jurist, and yet he's been the swing vote and actually have voted with the more liberal bloc on the court on a number of important cases. So I think that's why we are, regret that he's stepping down right now.
Right.
And who knows what we'll get. And, he's a Californian, too. So from that perspective, I think California is basically dead to Trump because we so clearly supported his opponent, and our party sort of statewide is not his party. So he doesn't spend much time here, isn't looking to help us really in any way, shape, or form. So,
well, I wonder whether, in your view, there's been a lot of progress, social progress in the last 50 years, and the Supreme Court has not stood in the way of that, and in some cases it's been helpful, civil rights and all that. And I don't see that you're able to reverse, with one appointment or even one court, social progress. Do you, is the sky falling, or do you think that we can continue the march for greater human rights and all that?
I think, as I said, it's dangerous to predict what new members of that court will do, and usually they end up coming back more toward the center than was feared, and I think that's true on both sides, frankly. But this president would, if he could, rescind a woman's right to choose. He would rescind funding for Planned Parenthood. I don't think he's supportive of same-sex marriage. So a lot of those important advances, I fear, could be at risk, or at least curbed and cut back with cases that come to the court.
And I must say that the Congress has kind of taken a pass on this, and so the courts have really been the ones who've stood in the way of some of his most egregious things. So hopefully they'll continue to do that. The other thing is the midterm elections coming up, and are you running for election? I don't
No, I'm not up to
I'm just,
no, I will tell you that I started in the U.S. Attorney's Office the same day as Adam Schiff.
Yes.
And I'm often asked about, political paths and the thing. I think if had Dianne Feinstein retired, I think Adam would be a wonderful United States Senator.
Yes.
I still hope to see that happen. And I'd be very interested in Adam's seat if that seat
Well, I was
opened
going
up.
to say, when are you going to run for Congress?
Well, Adam is absolutely tremendous and the right person for that job. And so I think he should have that job as long as he's willing to do it. And what a gift it's been to have him back in Washington in these last couple of years.
How about if Dianne is elected and then decides at some point to retire, and Adam gets appointed senator? Would that be interesting?
I would support that enthusiastically.
I mean, I've told Adam in the past that I thought he could do a lot of good as chair of the Intelligence Committee at this point.
Absolutely.
What about, speaking of politics, let's do that a little
bit.
There's 5 seats in the Southern California area that are potential swing red to blue districts, and there's some of them that are very promising. There's some division in the Democratic Party, I would say, between the Sanders and the Clinton wing, but it looks pretty positive, although I tell people that it's going to be about turnout and issues that are not just Trump, but some of the real kitchen table issues. So what's your view on the elections?
You saw, I'm sure, that yesterday a 10-term incumbent from New York was ousted by a 28-year-old, very progressive, even described as a socialist Democrat in New York. And first thing that came to my mind was Will Rogers' great line about, I don't belong to an organized political party. I'm a Democrat.
Yes.
As we do, and I think it's a function of when you are a party that is a coalition of different interests and groups and inclusive, then sometimes that means that you have those groups or those beliefs squaring off against one another. But I mean, I got to tell you, that 28-year-old candidate who's now going to be the congresswoman from that district, she looks very talented, but to lose a 10-term incumbent who was right on the precipice of real power in the Congress is maybe not a great thing.
Yeah, well, this is the push and pull of party politics. It's funny, as I talk to people about Trump and the issues of impeachment, which come up, I remind them that Andrew Johnson, who could barely stand up because he was so drunk all the time and slurred through his inauguration, was impeached but not convicted by one vote. So the likelihood that our current president will be impeached and convicted, there's not a lot of precedent for that.
That's true. I know Bob Mueller from my time at the Justice Department, and I will tell you that investigation is seemingly substantial and real, and I think that's the wild card, is what will happen there.
Do you think, for example, if he's named as an unindicted co-conspirator and that, a la Nixon, that would be enough to turn his base or to turn Republicans in Congress? Or do you think that's just going to be in one ear and out the other?
I'm not sure he would care, frankly. He always surprises us in terms of his reaction and sort of doubles down every time he does something even more offensive than the last thing that he did. So I think it would likely take actual charges. Even there, he's already expressed the view that he can pardon himself, which is questionable legally and politically would be disastrous. So I think that's the real question, is if Mueller actually brings charges against the president. That's one thing. If not, I don't see him stepping down. And I will say this too, Hoyt, my Democratic friends hate it when I say this. I think if the election were tomorrow, he would be reelected.
I am afraid so. I'm not being too partisan here, but I think that's probably right. Although I do see, even in Pasadena locally, there's an outpouring of grassroots support, which is based largely on the opposition to the president. There's a lot of impatience, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of emotion. How do you counsel your friends, your progressive friends, to kind of confront this difficulty and this challenge that we're going through?
I think it kind of gets down to what you said about looking at every office and every office holder and supporting good candidates. And in terms of even the presidential election, the biggest factor, and this is so obvious that I feel silly even saying it, but is the quality of the candidate. That's what elections turn on. And I yield to no one in my support of Hillary Clinton, but admittedly, she was not a perfect candidate by any means. She was polarizing to many people. So the key, I think, will be identifying candidates that we'll have confidence in.
I also believe, and I'm sure you share the idea, that people who are involved locally in politics is all local, and we will see this in these congressional races. It won't be about necessarily Trump. It'll be about local issues and local candidates. And people who get involved politically on a local level, that tends to translate to the statewide and national.
It really does.
Yeah.
In Mississippi yesterday, you probably saw there was a guy who I've met from LA who had sort of transplanted himself. He's married to the actress Celia Ward, and Celia's from Mississippi, and he was defeated by a state assembly member, and it was kind of a big surprise because he had the money and the Hollywood glamour and all, but it was heartening to know that people value experience in government. It's like, I can't remember who, but they said, there's a criticism that a career politician is running. I want a career politician, you know. Do you go to the dentist and say, wait a minute, you're not a career dentist, are you? I don't want you, governance is important and we need experienced professionals.
Well, on that note, you've been in elected office for 20 years. And I'm sure that there's a lot of rewards that you see from it. There are also a lot of sacrifices. But what are some of the things that you've learned as an individual in the years in public?
Well, it's a great question. You know, it is going on 20 years. There are no term limits in Pasadena. My family is starting a petition for term limits as we speak.
Yeah.
But, and seriously, on a serious level, you know, I watched my two sons, who are 21 and 22 now, go from being really infants to young men now. And I always ask myself, you know, I don't want to save every kid in Pasadena, but neglect my own kids.
Right,
and so
right.
I think my best hope is they've seen and inculcated a sense of community service, and we have accomplished some great things, Hoyt. I mean, we really, and I think one takeaway is it takes a lot of time and a lot of work to get things done.
Patience and an open mind, wouldn't you say?
You bet, yeah.
Yeah, you can't go in with a fixed opinion or my way or the highway
Absolutely.
idea. And certainly operating on a city council, a lot of compromise that's involved. This is politics, is it not? Compromise.
I always say among the 8 of us on the city council, there are usually 9 opinions on every issue. So it's very, very true. And you know, I've been very lucky. I've done things like the Habitat for Humanity project down at Desiderio, where we just had the ribbon cutting, or the John Vandekamp Bridge, which we dedicated last year. That bridge cost twice what a sort of steel and girder bridge replacement would have done, but my colleagues supported the historic bridge, and then they also supported naming it after John, which was really fitting and proper. So you really do cherish the victories along the way, and I think that's what we'll look back on.
Well, Steve, we so appreciate all
Thank
that
you.
you do for the city and that you've done, and look forward to a great future in public service. Don't let your family term you out. keep going, because we need you.
Well, thank you. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Steve. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Of course.
Yeah. This program was produced by Pasadena Media for the Arroyo Channel.